Great, thanks so much. Yeah, so this is joint work with frequent co-author Apostolos and Prasanna, Diego. So, you've probably noticed that sponsored listings have become ubiquitous in online marketplaces, where you very often, go to Instacart or Amazon or any other place, and there's sort of like, hey, you should match with this particular seller. This is like pretty rare in a labor market context. You've probably seen, and this really isn't even sponsorship, but something that's kind of going out there and saying like, hey, I'm a seller that is, maybe particularly interested in more work, or like, hey, pick me. And so, even though we kind of don't think of workers as the one advertising in labor markets, that's like hasn't always been true historically. Like, in classifieds, it actually used to be pretty common for people to say like position wanted. They would like describe their skills, and then the buyers in the market could come and say, oh, this person is a good fit for me. I think it's a little bit of a kind of a unknown question why this has kind of disappeared and you don't see these sort of advertisements. So, this paper is a little bit of kind of like going back in history and adding something that kind of looks a little bit like this. So if you imagine what this might look like in a labor market context, most jobs now where the match is computer mediated, the employer has something that looks like an applicant tracking system where it kind of puts applicants, in some order. Upwork and Fiverr and a bunch of other platforms, kind of have something similar where, hey, these are the people that applied to my job. Well, what advertising might look or sponsorship might look like in that particular context is, hey, take that kind of prominent position right at the top of the applicant tracking system and pin someone there and say, oh, most interested or best fit or whatever you might imagine. The basic idea why this might work, why might people find this interesting or useful, is that humans kind of have a tendency to read top to bottom. There's trillion-dollar companies built on this idea that people kind of start at the top and kind of work their way down. So you might imagine that these are my applicants, and Alice. Sorry, I really need glasses. Yes, Alice is sponsored. And that might mean something to an employer. Now, this is like a very separate question. Like whether or not this works is a very separate question for whether or not this is a good idea. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about that at the end. But there's lots of reasons you can imagine doing this is like not a good idea. But let's just focus on this question of, for the people who choose advertising, might it help them get hired? So, the arguments for yes is kind of the same reason there's very valuable ad businesses. One, it kind of could just be that, hey, it's prominent and I see it and okay, I'm interested in this person. Another that's more like kind of latent information is just this idea that, hey, if I'm willing to advertise on a job by job basis, not sort of generally, I'm kind of saying like, hey, I think that there's something here, I might be a particularly good fit for this job, and maybe you can't tell, but I'm kind of illustrating it. How many people here were economists that went on the econ job market? They have this like signal mechanism. People would know what I'm talking about. Did you use it?
Yeah.
Okay. I forgot about it and didn't use it. but is that idea of like, yes, you can apply, but you can also like send a poke. Like, I'm really interested in this job.
You also ask if it worked. I didn't.
Share that story later. No, it did not. I'll 2 seconds. I applied to MIT and I said, "Dear hiring committee at Cornell." I did not get the job. Yeah, it really threw things in a mess for me. Okay, but then the arguments for no. Well, it could send a signal of desperation, right? Like, if you're so good, why do you have to advertise? And like we've kind of, you've probably heard the expression like, if you have something to be done, ask a busy person to do it. There's a whole bunch of reasons why this may not be good. Okay. Then the arguments for like this wouldn't work at all, or this has like zero effect. Hiring is pretty high stakes. Now, the online context I'm talking about, it's much lower stakes, but it would be kind of odd that, you know, like, oh, the precise order in which candidates are presented is going to have these huge effects. You know, the other thing is that, you know, if I'm an employer, you know, I kind of want to put all the applicants in something like Bertrand competition with each other. And, you know, maybe I'm going to like reach out to everyone because I want to kind of play them off each other. In practice, actually, that doesn't happen very often. People tend to kind of come to a small set pretty quickly. But, you know, it is an argument that, hey, you kind of want to widen your negotiation, not narrow it. You know, this idea of like paying for prominence or exposure is not uncontroversial. That like this is like not a great way to organize markets generally. There was a very kind of a famous scandal, the payola scandal. Is anyone familiar with this? So like basically in like the 50s, record companies would pay DJs to play certain songs to try to like gin up popularity, and people kind of found this as really bad, that you were somehow like subverting people's natural preferences, or you're kind of doing something sort of unfair. So there's this idea of like buying your way to the top. You know, doesn't sit well with people. I'm going to kind of sidestep these ethical issues and just kind of focus again on the like, does this work? So a large online labor market was interested in trying out this idea. They control the applicant tracking system. They can kind of control how everything works. So they actually have the ability to pull this off. It's a market that you've probably all heard of for doing things like software development, design, transcription, things like that. Workers, they search and apply for jobs. It kind of looks like conventional markets. Applications are generally shown to employers in some kind of ranked order based on a proprietary algorithm that the platform has. And what they did experimentally was introduce something called boosted applications or boosted proposals. And what it was is that all workers could, on a job-by-job basis, they could see a job and say, I'm going to bid some amount to boost my application, which meant that I would be in the top 3 in this applicant pool. And I would have to pick a price. And so long as my price is in the top 3 that the platform has received, I'll stay in this prominent position, but I do have the potential to be knocked out. So this isn't like a context where, you know, you can just kind of, you know, all the sellers right away and you can do it immediately. Like, it has to play out over time. So it has this kind of dynamic structure where like you could get knocked out when you bid. Don't ask me like how you should bid in this game. I don't know. Maybe one of you can figure it out. But this is like the structure. And then what happened is at the end, there was like a settlement period. I'll actually talk more about that in a minute. So this became available, but where the randomization was, it was actually at the employer level. And what differed, it looked all the same to workers, but at the employer level, what they saw depended on their treatment assignment. And I'll talk about what they saw. Basically, in some cases, they could see the advertising and they would get the ranking effects. Other times, even though we collected the bids and could have done an order, and we didn't, we just gave them the organic. So we kind of know what would have happened, you know, but for this. Yeah, Hugh?
As a clarification, how is this treatment different than the one you presented this morning?
Yeah, so that one was just a static, like, I pay some money to the platform and a badge appears. This is much closer to like search advertising. Like I'm gonna show up for a query and I'm gonna bid. The big difference here, they are similar, and I was kind of worried that people would think I'm like, this guy's giving the same talk, but it's not quite that. One of the things that's different here is we really can dig into the decomposition of like ranking, signaling, and like selection effects. Where the other one, it was just like badge on, badge off. But it's the same, like randomizing at the level of employer to learn what happened is a shared feature of the two. So 3.5 plus million applications, 500,000 workers, a little bit less than 200,000 jobs. This is what it looked like. You could mouse over and see that this was a paid thing. And I just want to flag, like, if we just randomized the whole thing of advertising, ranking, notice about this all at once, you know, we wouldn't be able to kind of decompose like where any effects were coming from. You know, we we'd like to know, just doing like, say, a simple comparison of advertisers to non-advertisers is gonna mix together all those effects. So clearly you couldn't do anything just observationally. But then just having an advertising, no advertising comparison, it would tell us net effects, but we wouldn't be able to separate out what was the ranking effect, what was the signal effect, which the signal effect very well could be negative, right? If I have the like, oh, hey, you're desperate, you know, which one wins? It's a little bit of a horse race. So, this was the actual structure. There was a placebo where, you know, say Alice, she bid, but we kind of collect that information, but we don't actually implement the auction and we don't actually change the ranking. There's this one, which is the kind of adds on experiment with experience, which is like exactly what you would implement once you roll this out. And then this kind of weird one where we put Alice at the top, give her that prominent position, but don't actually indicate in any way that it was an advertised feature. You know,
Is that legal?
is what?
Is there money?
Shut it down. No, you know, so what they did was they gave all the money back. No, but this is a good question, right? Because this would be kind of like an undeclared promotion. So they cleared it with the lawyers and said, as long as you refund all the money, it's fine. And that's what they did.
First one legal, you don't give the money back.
Oh no, the money was given back in that one too. Yeah. Bunch of cops. You know, so the auction format here, you know, posted by a treat employer, workers set the maximum number of coins. So they could pay for this, but they could also use credits that they get for doing good things on the platform as well, which I think is actually an important point that I'll try to return to. Top 3 bidders at a time are pinned in these boosted slots. Then there was like a settlement period where at 7 days after posting, you know, if you still were in the top, you paid the third highest bid or the first out of the money bid. Anyway, you get the idea. And then here's all the reimbursement conditions where they would refund the money for people who happen to be in the cells where they didn't actually get the benefit. Yeah, Sebastian.
Just for a set of queries?
No, this is for like a literal job. Yeah, so I see the job and I have to give a job specific bid. Yeah, so in that sense, it's much more like item specific than say like the search context case. Like you know exactly what jobs you're bidding on. Okay. Yeah, I think I already talked about this. Okay, so let me just get to the meat of it, like what this actually did. So what I'm gonna again, the randomization was at the level of the employer. But because the job seekers can't condition on this information, they don't know the treatment status, you can actually analyze this at the level of the job application, which the individual worker application. And so there's a somewhat ugly regression formula that lets you do this regression, but I'm just going to show you like marginal effects. So first, let's just look at the placebo cell. So this is how you should interpret this coefficient, is just in a world where the employer can't see anything, how much more likely is an advertiser to be hired, right? So the employer is not influenced by anything because they don't know about it. Here we actually see they're actually about two times more likely to be hired than a non-advertiser. So this is endogenous, right? But what's just showing is you get something that looks like virtuous selection into advertising here. So the people who advertise just have a higher baseline probability of getting hired. Next up, this is the ads on with a notice experience. And actually, I think my animation I'll just spill the whole beans. I had a slow reveal, but in the interest of time, I'll just jump right to it. Do I try using the spotlight feature? Okay. Yeah, all right, placebo, okay. Then here this adds on with notice. Here you can see this very large boost in their probability of getting hired, okay? Then over here, this is the ranking effect, but they did not get the notice. And so you can kind of stack these arrows. You'll notice that there's actually a positive signaling effect that like indicate by advertising here is actually indicating like the employers are kind of viewing that as a good thing, not a bad thing, not kind of a negative thing. But I should make it clear, it really is dominated by this ranking effect is where most of the kind of big payoff is. But my prior was that this was going to be negative. I was hoping I thought this would be positive just because you get money for doing good things. So kind of here in this market, like the rich are good. But it doesn't have to be the case necessarily.
Can I?
Yeah.
So if you compare the organic treatment with this ad boosted treatment and compare position 1, and do you see a difference? So if I was ranked first organically versus I was.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a good question. I don't think we did that like sort of by position effects, but there's no reason we couldn't. I mean, given how much data we have, I think we would have the case. One thing that's important here is that the job seekers don't know what their organic rank is going to be. Which you could imagine, if I knew I was going to be ranked #1 organically, well, I guess in an advertising world, now I'm going to get pushed down to 3. I haven't thought much about that, but you could imagine that affecting sort of what people are willing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm wondering with the signaling effect, what your intuition is for why that's positive. Is it just because like there's a badge next to them, so they stand out more? And I'm also wondering if you think that signaling effect will stay positive over time.
Great question. So yeah, I mean, you might kind of worry that it's like just like a salience, like, oh, something flashy and new, I'm gonna click on that. I think this effect does persist. Like we keep kind of watching this over, and it's kind of stayed constant for years. Or that's tell you how long it takes me to write papers. But on the kind of this like, what do they think it is? Here's what I think it is. I think it's employers are very often trying to get some signal that this person is really interested in the job. Like they think that there's like match specific surplus, and they're not just sort of applying blindly. They're like, hey, I looked at your job and I think that I'm like a good fit for this. That's my guess. I think an interesting question though is, well, okay, if you're so interested, why don't you like lower the wage bid then? Well, what I think happens there is if I'm forced to lower my wage bid, then I'm kind of like, if employers are kind of inferring my productivity with my wage ask at the same time, I don't get the full benefit of say like dropping my price by 10%. I just like seem maybe 8% worse, right? So I suspect like giving people another outlet to signal interest other than through the price system is probably where this is coming from. Yes.
I wonder how much of that signaling effect will differ with different ways of acquiring the boosting or the boosting we provided. Like I would picture platforms that maybe give a fixed amount of boosting to everyone, so it's like you have a quota of boosting.
Great question.
I mean, of the market, right?
Yeah, no.
Apps or like that.
So here's what I think. I don't think this is a general result. Like I don't think you could go to every platform. If you introduce advertising, you'll get virtuous selection into advertising. But I think that it becomes a platform imperative that you keep it virtuous by doing things like, hey, like if you're really good, let me give you some free credits. Or because imagine like a world where people start to think that it's bad people that select into advertising, then it's like, oh great, you've told me who to ignore, right? Like the platform would teach you to kind of not pay attention to these people. So I think that it becomes this imperative to keep virtuous selection into advertising. But I don't think this is anything that like platforms that have advertising don't know already by doing like scoring bids or doing other things to like keep bad people away from like using the advertising system, because the whole thing would kind of fall apart if it was like, oh, here's like this really kind of high information signal that I shouldn't pay attention to you. So what I've kind of argued with the platform is like you really need to keep that number positive, and you need to like do things to keep it positive. So to your point, I don't think it's a general result, but I think it's like something that you need to keep positive for this to work. What about employers? Just really fast. This just like didn't help or hurt employers as far as we can tell. And that's not exciting to me. Like it's a little unfortunate. Like you kind of would hope you would like grow the pie here. It does seem like it just sort of moved around who got matched. But it's not negative. You can see across all the cells, basically you get a precise 0. the positive platform story would be, well, if you raise revenue from this and it does generate revenue, you could use it to do other things like lower the take rate in other places. So yeah, it's zero summish, but it doesn't have to be, you know, quite so negative. I kind of already talked through this stuff. Yeah. You know, one thing a last point, you can see on these platforms, like, generative AI has been kind of a disaster for, writing. Like, people normally would have taken cover letters as like a great signal of interest, like, oh, you took the time to like look at my job and compare it to your resume. That is like totally dead. Like, anyone can kind of use these systems to make it seem like you really care about it. So I think the upshot is that maybe more systems that are more like mechanism designy or auction to indicate interest will probably become more important as like other non-monetary systems of conveying interest are killed off. Okay, thank you.